The photograph was taken in the winter of 1902, though no record says who held the camera. It surfaced decades later in a forgotten parish archive on the south side of Chicago, folded inside a brittle ledger that smelled of damp linen and dust. The image, marked with faint fingerprints along its edges, captured a room no one remembered, a classroom inside the Parish Orphan home, lit only by a single reluctant beam of daylight slipping through a frost-covered window. The caption beneath it, written in shaky ink, read, "7 girls with braids. One signs a surname she's never heard." The print was fragile, a gelatin silver photograph barely holding its shape, but under the right light, the details emerged like a secret whispered through time. 7 girls sat or stood around a wooden table. Their dresses were simple, cotton, hand-mended, the kind that frayed at the seams where small fingers had learned to sew. Each wore her hair in braids tied with thin ribbons, though only one ribbon had color left, a faded blue now almost gray. Their expressions were quiet but heavy, the silence of children who had learned that the world listens only when they don't speak. The girl in front held a slate across her lap. Her hands were steady, but her face betrayed uncertainty, lips slightly parted, brows drawn, as though she were being asked a question she could not answer. The chalk in her fingers left a trembling line as she wrote, and the word frozen in the photograph stopped mid-gesture. Her name, or the attempt of it, was there for anyone patient enough to see. The first part was clear, Eleanor. The second, a single letter followed by hesitation, W, and then a faint streak as if the chalk had slipped. The archivist who found the photograph didn't know what to make of it. It was haunting, but not in the way of ghosts. It was haunted by something quieter, an unfinished moment caught between obedience and fear. He studied the details again. In the background, a crucifix leaned slightly to the right, its wooden edges cracked. A kerosene lamp hung above, its glass smudged with soot. The blackboard behind the girls bore faint remnants of arithmetic, 12 plus 7, 19. But below it, someone had drawn the outline of a house. He wondered who had drawn it. There was a shadow on the left edge of the frame, barely perceptible, like the hem of a garment caught in motion. Perhaps the nun who supervised the class had moved just as the shutter closed. Or perhaps it was only an illusion caused by age. Yet the more he stared, the less it seemed accidental. The presence in that shadow felt deliberate, as though someone or something had chosen to remain unseen. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded cursive, were 3 words. She spelled it wrong. The archivist frowned. He compared the handwriting to other notes from the same archive. Labels from the parish records, donation ledgers, inspection reports, none matched. Whoever wrote it had done so later, perhaps years after the image was taken. He placed the photograph under magnification, tracing the details. One of the girls, standing slightly apart from the others, stared directly at the lens. Her pupils were faintly unfocused, her mouth just open enough to suggest a whisper. The light hit her face differently from the rest, as if the sun had moved between exposures. He cataloged the image as unverified photograph, circa 1902, and left for the night. But when he returned the next morning, the photograph was no longer on his desk. It had been placed carefully on the windowsill, angled toward the light. Beneath it, a single word was written in chalk on a scrap of paper, Eleanor. He told himself it was a coincidence. Perhaps a draft had moved it, or a cleaning clerk had found it misplaced. But no one else had been inside the building that night. The doors had been locked, the alarms untouched. That evening, he took the photograph home. He didn't mean to, but something about it felt incomplete, as though it expected him to finish what had been left undone. He placed it on his desk under the dim glow of a reading lamp and opened the parish record book again. The Parish Orphan Home of St. Mary's had been founded in 1895, serving unaccompanied girls of faith between the ages of 5 and 12. The names listed in the admission register were neat, precise, written in ink that had long turned brown, but some lines were crossed out. Some children marked as relocated, others as lost to illness. On the page for March 1902, 7 names were written together. The last one stopped midline, Eleanor W. Next to it, in faint pencil, another hand had added, "Surname unknown." The archivist sat back in his chair. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. He turned to the photograph again, and for the first time, noticed a faint blur in the lower corner, as if the image itself had begun to fade. The girl's hand, the one holding the chalk, was disappearing into the grain. That night, he dreamed of her. He saw the classroom exactly as it had been. The dim light, the cracked crucifix, the scent of kerosene and chalk. The girls stood in a line before the blackboard, braids hanging like ropes down their backs. A nun's voice echoed faintly, firm but tired. "Every name has a place," she said. "Write it, and God will know you." One by one, The girls wrote their names: Margaret, Clara, Ruth, Agnes, until only Eleanor remained. She stepped forward, chalk trembling in her hand. "Write your name, child," the voice commanded. "I don't have one," Eleanor whispered. "You do. It's written here." The nun pointed to a paper in her hand. The ink was smudged, the surname unreadable. Eleanor pressed the chalk to the board and began to write Eleanor, and then stopped. Her eyes darted toward the corner of the room, where a shape, something tall and veiled, stood watching. "I don't know that name," she said softly. "It isn't mine." The chalk snapped. The sound woke the archivist. His lamp had burned through the night. The photograph lay face down on the desk. He turned it over carefully, and his heart skipped. The name on the slate was complete now. It read Eleanor Wainscott, but when he searched the records again, there was no child by that name. No Wainscots listed in the entire parish census of 1902. He lifted the photo toward the light once more. The other girls seemed unchanged, frozen in their stillness. Only Eleanor's eyes had altered. They no longer looked downward. They stared directly into his own. Outside, the snow began to fall. The sound was soft, almost like chalk against slate. He placed the photograph back into the envelope and sealed it shut. But as he turned off the light, the silence of the room deepened. Not empty, but waiting. Something had started the moment the name was finished, and somewhere in that grainy image, a girl who had never heard her own surname had finally been given one. Before the photograph, before the slate and the unfinished name, there was only the sound of the orphanage bell. It rang every morning at 7, sharp and hollow, echoing through the brick corridors like the memory of a prayer no one believed in anymore. The Parish Orphan home of St. Mary's stood on the western edge of Chicago, where the smoke from the factories met the lake wind and turned the air gray. To the passerby, it looked ordinary, a red brick building with a cross on its roof and a small iron gate at the entrance. But for those who lived within, it was a world unto itself. Inside, the corridors smelled of starch and damp linen. The walls were lined with faded portraits of saints, their eyes pale and watchful. The nuns who ran the home moved like shadows between prayers and chores, their voices a soft hum of Latin words the children repeated without understanding. Life there was not cruel, but it was narrow. Each day folded neatly into the next. Meals, lessons, chores, prayers, sleep. The girls learned to stitch, to scrub floors, to read the gospel, to keep their heads bowed. Silence was considered holy. Among them, Eleanor was different. She was not unruly, not ungrateful, simply misplaced. She obeyed, she worked, she whispered her prayers, but something in her never aligned with the rhythm of the place. The other girls sensed it too. They said her dreams were strange, that she spoke names in her sleep that none of them recognized. She was the newest among them, admitted only 3 months before the photograph was taken. When Sister Agnes filled out her entry in the register, she paused at the line marked Surname. "It's Wainscott," said the parish clerk who brought her from the train station. "That's what the papers say. But the girl doesn't know it," Sister Agnes replied. "She'll learn," said the clerk. Eleanor stood by the window that day, her hands folded, staring at the snowfall. She was 8 years old. Her hair was long and the color of wheat left too long in the sun. When Sister Agnes asked her where she had come from, she said only, "I remember a house with a red door and someone humming," nothing more. The other girls, Margaret, Clara, Ruth, Agnes the younger, and the twins, Lydia and Grace, accepted her in the quiet way children do when words are useless. They braided each other's hair, shared the same spoon during meals, whispered secrets after the bell. Eleanor watched more than she spoke. She had a way of listening that made the others uneasy, as if she could hear something they couldn't. One evening during handwriting lessons, Sister Agnes walked between the rows of desks. The girls practiced their names carefully, the ink freezing slightly as it touched the paper in the cold air. "Your name is a gift," the sister reminded them. "It tells God who you are." Eleanor stared at her page. She wrote Eleanor slowly, beautifully, the letters slanting left. Then, at the line for surname, she hesitated. "Go on," said the sister softly. "Wainscott." Eleanor's hand trembled. "That's not my name," she whispered. The sister frowned. "Of course it is, child. It's written in the register." Eleanor's eyes filled, though she didn't cry. "Someone else's name is written there. I can't hear mine anymore." The room went still. Even the ink seemed to stop flowing. Sister Agnes touched her shoulder gently. "Perhaps you'll remember it in time," she said. That night, as the girls prepared for bed, Clara whispered, "Maybe she's a foundling. My mother said sometimes they take children from the river." "Or she's cursed," murmured Lydia, crossing herself. Ruth rolled her eyes. "Don't be foolish. She's just quiet." But when the lights went out, the whispers didn't stop. They said that sometimes Eleanor talked in her sleep, that she murmured words like prayers, but not in any tongue they knew. And once, Grace swore she saw her standing by the window in the middle of the night, eyes open, mouth moving soundlessly, as if she were answering someone outside. The next morning, Sister Agnes found a single line of chalk on the blackboard. "She's not one of us." None of the girls admitted to writing it. Eleanor said nothing. Days passed and the winter deepened. The lake froze solid. The pipes rattled. The ink froze again and again. The girls' hands cracked from scrubbing. At night, the nuns prayed longer than usual, their rosaries clattering softly in the dark. Something about the orphanage felt heavier, as if the air itself had gained weight. One afternoon, Father Benedict visited from the parish. He was old, his hands shaking as he blessed the girls. When his eyes fell on Eleanor, he paused. "I knew a wainscot once," he said. "Long ago, but that was before the fire." Sister Agnes looked up. "The fire, Father?" He nodded slowly. "A family from the west side. Their house burned one winter. Only the youngest girl was never found." He turned back to Eleanor, who stared at him with that same quiet confusion. "What was her name?" she asked. The priest hesitated. "Eleanor," he said. The sister's rosary slipped from her hand. That night, Eleanor dreamed again of the red door. Behind it, the sound of a woman humming, soft and low. When she tried to open the door, it burned her hand. She woke screaming. The sisters prayed over her until dawn. The next morning, during lessons, the photographer arrived, a tall man in a wool coat, sent by the parish to document the orphanage for its annual report. He was polite, soft-spoken, his hands trembling slightly as he set up his camera. The girls gathered near the window where the light was best. "Just look forward," he said. "Don't smile." Eleanor sat at the front, the slate in her lap. Sister Agnes whispered, "Write your name clearly, child. Let the Father see." Eleanor hesitated, then began to write, Eleanor. The chalk scraped softly. Then, instead of wainscot, she paused. "What is it?" the photographer asked. Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not my name." Sister Agnes frowned. "Go on. God knows it." The girl looked at her, then down again. "He doesn't." The chalk moved once more, but no one saw what she wrote before the shutter clicked. When the flash went off, the light filled the room like a storm. For a moment, no one could see. When their vision cleared, Eleanor was still sitting there, but the chalk had broken, and the slate lay face down on the floor. The photographer packed his equipment quickly. "Uneasy. That's enough," he said. "You'll have your picture." Later that evening, Sister Agnes turned the slate over. The word on it was incomplete. Eleanor W. The rest was a long, wavering line that trailed off the edge. She went to the chapel that night and prayed for forgiveness without knowing why. When the photograph arrived a week later, everyone gasped. The girls were there, their faces solemn as ever, but the light fell differently on Eleanor. Her hand holding the chalk was a blur, as though she'd moved too quickly for the shutter, though no one had seen her move. And in the far corner, barely visible, stood a faint figure, a woman in dark clothing, her hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder. No one could explain it. Sister Agnes sent the print to Father Benedict, who never replied. The letter returned unopened, marked deceased. The nuns burned the negative. But when the fire went out, the photograph remained untouched, lying in the ashes. And by morning, the slate on Eleanor's desk bore a single word that none of the sisters had written: home. The morning after the photograph was taken, the world inside St. Mary's felt changed, though no one could say why. The air was heavier, the silence thicker. Even the light seemed slower, as if it had grown tired of entering that place. The snow outside had stopped falling, yet the frost on the windows refused to melt. The girls moved quietly, their shoes clicking on the floor like distant echoes. Sister Agnes said nothing during breakfast. She looked pale, distracted, as though she had forgotten something she could not remember again. The girls whispered about the photograph. "Do you think we'll see it?" asked Grace. "Maybe it'll be in the parish paper." Clara shook her head. The sister said it was only for the record. Ruth traced circles on the table with her spoon. "I don't like how she looked in it." "Who?" "Eleanor." No one replied. After morning prayers, the sisters ordered the girls to their chores. Buckets of cold water, rags, soap. The smell of iron filled the air. Eleanor was sent to clean the small room behind the chapel, a place few of the others entered. It was where old hymnals, broken benches, and boxes of forgotten letters were kept. The floor creaked under her weight. Dust hung in the light like snow suspended in air. As she worked, she found a trunk pushed against the wall. The lock was broken. Inside were dozens of papers, most too brittle to unfold. But one, folded neatly on top, caught her eye. The ink had faded to brown, but the handwriting was delicate and feminine. The first line read, "To the Sisters of St. Mary's, in gratitude for the care of my daughter." Eleanor stared at it, her hands trembling. She read the signature at the bottom, smudged but still legible, Catherine Wainscott. She sank to her knees, breath shallow. Her name, the name everyone said was hers, yet it felt like it belonged to someone else. She tried to remember her mother, but all she saw was fire, a red door, smoke rising, the sound of someone humming a song she couldn't place. When she brought the letter to Sister Agnes, the nun's face went white. "Where did you find this?" "In the room behind the chapel," Eleanor said softly. Sister Agnes took it, glancing over the handwriting, her lips moving silently as she read. When she reached the signature, her hand froze. "This letter is dated 1892, she whispered. "But I wasn't born then," Eleanor said. The sister looked up slowly. "No, child, you weren't." That night, Sister Agnes searched the parish archives by candlelight. She found a record of the Wainscott family, Catherine and her husband, Thomas. They had lived near the river until a fire destroyed their home in 1892. Both parents perished. Their only daughter, Eleanor, age 6, was never found. But the year was wrong. If that Eleanor had died in 1892, then who was the child sleeping in St. Mary's now, 10 years later, bearing her name? The sister prayed until her knees ached. The next morning she told Father Benedict what she had found. The old priest listened in silence, his eyes clouded. "I told you," he said, "the Wainscott child was never found. Perhaps this is God's mercy, or his reminder," Sister Agnes replied. But when she looked for Eleanor that afternoon, the girl was gone. Her bed was made, her shoes neatly aligned, her slate resting on the pillow, written across it faintly in chalk, "Not mine." The sisters searched the entire orphanage. They looked in the attic, in the laundry, behind the altar. The snow outside was untouched. The gates were still locked. By nightfall they found her sitting in the chapel at the front pew, eyes closed, humming softly, the same melody she had heard in her dream. "Eleanor," Sister Agnes whispered, kneeling beside her. "Where have you been?" The girl opened her eyes. "I went home." The nun frowned. "Home?" "She was waiting for me," Eleanor said, her voice calm, almost serene. "The lady in the fire. She told me my name." Sister Agnes felt a chill crawl through her spine. "What name, child?" Eleanor smiled faintly as if listening to someone else. "The one before hers." The nun shook her head. "You mustn't say such things." But the girl only turned her gaze toward the altar, where the candlelight flickered in the shape of moving shadows. That night the sisters took turns watching her as she slept. The air in the dormitory was thick and warm, though no fire burned. Sometime after midnight, Eleanor began to murmur. The words were soft, rhythmic, like a prayer. Sister Agnes leaned close to listen, and for a moment she could swear she heard two voices, one child's, one older, weaving together. She tried to wake the girl, but Eleanor's eyes snapped open before she touched her. "It's not yours either," the child whispered. The candle beside the bed went out. At dawn, the nuns found the chapel door open. Snow had drifted inside, forming a thin white path down the aisle. On the altar lay a single braid of hair, bound with a faded blue ribbon. No one saw Eleanor again that day. When Father Benedict arrived, he found the sisters gathered near the altar, their faces pale. He listened to their account, then walked slowly to the front. He picked up the braid, turning it over in his hand. "She's gone where she belongs," he said finally. Sister Agnes stepped forward. "And where is that, Father?" The old man hesitated. "Sometimes," he said, "God takes back what he never gave." The sisters didn't understand. 2 days later, a messenger from the parish delivered the developed photograph. Sister Agnes couldn't bring herself to open it, so she left it on her desk. But that night, as the wind howled outside, she woke to the sound of laughter, faint, girlish, coming from the hallway. She rose, candle in hand, and followed it. The corridor was empty, but the sound continued, leading her to her office. The envelope lay open on the desk. The photograph inside was the same. 7 girls with braids, the same light, the same solemn faces. But where Eleanor had been, there was now only an empty chair. The slate was gone. The faint outline of a woman in the corner remained, clearer than before. Sister Agnes fell to her knees. The next morning, she burned the photograph in the chapel stove. But when the ashes cooled, a single piece remained unburned, the corner with the girl's name, Eleanor W. That spring, the orphanage received a letter from a small parish 2 towns north. It was addressed to Sister Agnes. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a single line. She remembers now. There was no signature. For years afterward, the sisters refused to speak of the Wainscott child. Her name was removed from the register. The bed she had slept in was given to another girl. The room behind the chapel was locked and never reopened. But sometimes, when the bell rang in winter, the sound carried differently, thin, distant, as if answered by another bell far away. And on the coldest mornings, when the frost gathered thick on the windows, the sisters swore they could see the faint outline of a child's hand pressed against the glass. It was always small, always still, and beside it, written in the condensation, a single word. By the time the world forgot the Parish Orphan home of St. Mary's, Chicago had already outgrown its ghosts. The street where it once stood was paved over, renamed, and eventually devoured by the slow sprawl of factories and smoke. The lake wind no longer smelled of coal and iron, but of gasoline and winter rain. Only the oldest priest remembered the building that had housed the unwanted, and even they spoke of it in half-whispers, as though to mention it aloud might summon the cold that used to linger in its halls. Nearly a century later, in the city's southern archive, a man named Charles Marin was tasked with cataloging what remained of the diocesan records. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who found comfort in order. Boxes of forgotten baptism certificates, marriage records, and death ledgers surrounded him like the bones of another age. He liked to think of it as work that gave names back to the nameless, small victories against oblivion. It was in late November when he first came across the folder marked St. Mary's Orphan Home, 1895-1903. The paper smelled of mildew, its corners fused with age. Inside, most documents were ruined by water damage, but among them a thin envelope remained intact, sealed with red wax. Written across it in fading ink was a date, February 3rd, 1902. Charles turned the envelope over. There was no name, only a small smudge in the corner, like someone had pressed their thumb against it a long time ago. He broke the seal carefully, and inside found a single sheet of paper and a small photograph. The paper contained only one line, written in looping script. She signed a name that wasn't hers. The photograph matched the description he had seen in earlier records. 7 orphan girls, their faces solemn, their hair braided. But one thing was different. The image seemed impossibly crisp, untouched by decay, as if it had been printed yesterday. He studied it closely. The girl in the front, the one with the slate, seemed almost alive under the light. The word she had written was visible but blurred, as though the ink had not yet settled. Eleanor W. He ran his finger lightly along the surface, and for an instant the texture beneath his skin changed. Smooth, then rough, then warm. He blinked. The warmth vanished. He placed the photograph aside and began searching through the rest of the documents. At the bottom of the box he found a ledger labeled Admissions, St. Mary's. The ink was brittle, nearly unreadable, but the entries were still there. Margaret Connolly, Clara Hughes, Lydia and Grace Barker, and at the end, Eleanor Wainscott. But unlike the others, her name was written twice, the first in black ink, the second, fainter, in graphite, and struck through. Next to it, under status, the word returned had been added. He frowned. Children were adopted, transferred, lost, but never returned. He wrote the word in his notebook, circled it, and moved on. But that night, the image refused to leave him. He dreamed of snow and of a bell ringing through empty corridors. He saw 7 girls in a long wooden room, their faces half lit, their hands folded neatly on the desk. Then slowly, one by one, they turned their heads toward him. Only the last girl smiled. When he woke, his throat was dry. He turned on the lamp, and there, beside the bed, lay the photograph. He had left it at the archive. For days he told himself there must be an explanation. Perhaps he had slipped it into his coat by accident. Perhaps his memory had betrayed him. But each night something new appeared in the image. A shadow moving where there hadn't been one. A faint outline near the crucifix. Once, he thought he saw a woman standing behind the girls, her hand resting gently on the shoulder of the child with the slate. He tried to document it. He photographed the photograph, scanned it, enlarged it, but on every copy, the figure vanished, leaving only the original unchanged. The name Wainscott began to follow him. It appeared in church records from the late 1800s, in obituaries, even on a burned page from a city census. A family of 4, lost in a fire in 1892, a daughter unaccounted for. He traced the address listed in the census to what was now an empty lot by the river. The foundation stones were still there, covered in weeds. He stood where the door might have been and thought he heard something. Not quite wind, not quite voice, humming faintly, tunelessly, as if from beneath the ground. He told no one. The next week, while sorting through more files, he found another envelope, this one labeled Closed Case, Orphan Inquiry. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to Father Benedict, Parish of St. Mary's. The ink was thin, but legible. Reverend Father, I fear one of the girls in our care is not what she seems. She does not answer to her name, and her presence troubles the others. Last night she spoke in her sleep, repeating words that chilled the heart. I do not know whose child she is. The name she writes is not the one in our records. I have prayed, but heaven is silent. Sister Agnes, February 1902. Charles set the letter down, his pulse quickening. The date matched the one on the photograph. He checked the parish registry again. Father Benedict had died the same week. He leaned back in his chair. The archive was silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. The room smelled of paper and age, a dry scent that clung to everything. But beneath it he caught something else, faint, sweet, like old smoke. He looked again at the photograph. The girl's hand seemed different now, more defined. Her fingers were slightly curved, as though the chalk had just fallen from them. He leaned closer, and that was when he saw it. New writing on the slate. Not Eleanor W., but a single word. Listen. He dropped it. The photograph landed face down on the table. When he turned it over again, the word was gone. That night he dreamed of the orphanage again. This time he was inside it. The floor creaked beneath his steps. The smell of dust and oil lamps filled the air. At the front of the room stood a nun, her back turned. "They never left," she said without looking at him. "They just forgot their names." He woke gasping, his hands covered in fine white dust, chalk. When he returned to the archive the next day, the box marked St. Mary's was gone. He asked the clerk who had helped him catalog it, but she swore no such file had ever existed. He searched the logs, the intake records, the ledger index, nothing. Yet that evening, when he unlocked his office, the photograph was waiting on his desk, perfectly centered, as if placed there by careful hands. The caption beneath it had changed. 7 girls with braids. One signs a surname she's never heard. He sat down, staring at it for a long time. Then, against all sense, he whispered the name aloud. Eleanor Wainscott. The lights flickered. For a moment the room felt too small. The air thickened, heavy and warm, as though the walls were breathing. Somewhere behind him, a faint sound, the scrape of chalk against wood. He turned. The wall was blank, but he could smell it. Limestone, dust, something ancient and human. He stood, heart pounding, and left the office. He locked the door behind him, swearing never to open that box again. But the next morning, when the janitor entered to clean, the photograph was gone, and on the blackboard near the back wall someone had written a single line in careful, childlike letters. "She's still learning." The handwriting was small, curved, and unmistakably feminine, and beneath it, in faint chalk, a surname that no one in the building could read. Winter returned to Chicago the way it always did, slowly, without grace, heavy with its gray breath. The city had changed again, as it always did, but the archives remained untouched, a monument of dust and silence. The clerks came and went, boxes were moved, catalogs rewritten, but the room where Charles Marin had worked stayed locked for months. Some said he'd resigned, others that he had fallen ill. The truth was simpler. One day he didn't come back. His desk remained as he left it, neat, orderly, everything in its place. Only the photograph was gone. In its place lay a single braid of hair, bound with a faded blue ribbon. No one could explain where it came from. When the cleaning staff finally cleared the office, they found something on the underside of his desk drawer, written in pencil, faint but legible. The name was never hers to keep. The note was filed away, forgotten among dozens of others that no one read. Years passed. The room was converted into a storage closet. The light bulb burned out and was never replaced. Until one afternoon, decades later, a young intern named Mary Ann was assigned to reorganize the diocesan archives. She was 24, with a fascination for forgotten stories. Her task was simple: digitize what could be saved, discard what couldn't. It was lonely work, but she liked it that way. On her 3rd day, she found an unmarked box on the top shelf. No catalog number, no label. Inside were brittle papers, a rusted rosary, and a small photograph wrapped in wax paper. She unwrapped it carefully. 7 girls with braids. She frowned, adjusting her glasses. The image looked too perfect. It wasn't sepia like the others. It was clearer, sharper, as if the air around the figures had been preserved. She studied it, tracing their expressions. None of them smiled. One of them, the girl in front, held a slate. Something was written on it, but the chalk marks had faded almost to nothing. Mary Ann tilted the picture toward the light, and for a moment, she could see it. Eleanor W. Then the rest disappeared. She placed it aside and checked the folder beneath it. Inside was a letter, folded neatly. It was written in a hand so delicate it looked like it could vanish under her fingertips. February 3rd, 1902. To whomever finds this, know that we tried. The child was not meant to remain. She wrote what was forbidden, and in doing so, she remembered. I pray her soul is at peace, but if she is not, then the name will wander until someone speaks it again. Sister Agnes Mary Ann looked up. The fluorescent light above her flickered. She glanced at the photograph again. The air felt different, heavier, charged, like the moment before a storm. She stood, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in around her. The building was empty. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that it was only an old photo and an older story. She slipped the photograph into a plastic sleeve and added it to the digitization pile. But when she tried to scan it, the machine froze. The monitor filled with static, and for a brief second an image flashed across the screen. A classroom, wooden desks, a crucifix on the wall. Then it vanished, replaced by an error message. She stepped back, heart racing. On the glass of the scanner, faint lines had appeared, traced in condensation. A child's handprint. Marianne backed away, knocking over her chair. The sound echoed far too loudly in the stillness. The handprint slowly faded. She tried to laugh it off, but her throat was dry. She shut the computer down and gathered her things. As she turned to leave, she glanced once more at the photograph. The girl in front, the one with the slate, was looking at her, not in the way old portraits sometimes seem to follow you. Her gaze had shifted, unmistakably. Marianne stared, frozen. The air around the photograph shimmered slightly, like heat rising from pavement. And then, so softly she almost missed it, she heard humming, a lullaby, ancient and broken. She dropped the picture and ran. The sound followed her down the hall, fading only when she reached the exit. She didn't return to the archives the next day. 2 weeks later, her supervisor found the photograph on the floor, face down. He picked it up, brushed the dust off, and placed it back in its box. He didn't notice the faint marks left on the back of the image, tiny impressions in the paper, as if written from beneath. They spelled a single word: remember. Over the years, the photograph resurfaced again and again, in exhibitions, in books, and online archives, each version slightly different from the last. Sometimes the number of children changed, 6, not 7. Sometimes the background faded, or a faint blur appeared behind them, and in every version the slate's writing shifted, sometimes blank, sometimes marked with an initial, sometimes with a word that only appeared when the light hit it just right. Some said it was a printing error, others called it a trick of the emulsion. But those who worked too long with the image always reported the same thing: a song, heard faintly, just at the edge of hearing, a humming, low and slow, like the sound of someone remembering. The last time anyone saw the photograph was in 1998, during a historical exhibit on early 20th century Chicago. A woman in her 70s approached the curator after closing hours. She was quiet, well-dressed, her hair tied neatly in a braid that had long since turned silver. "I know this place," she said, pointing to the photograph. "That's St. Mary's." The curator smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am. It was demolished in 1910. The woman tilted her head. "No, not then. I was there in 1902. The curator frowned. "You couldn't have been. You'd have to be older than I look," she finished, with a small smile. Before he could reply, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand. "If you find the slate," she whispered, "don't read the name aloud." When he opened the paper later, it was blank. She was never seen again. After the exhibition, the photograph went missing from the collection. No record of its removal, no insurance claim, just gone. But weeks later, janitors began reporting odd things. A faint smell of smoke near the archive room, a soft tapping on the window during storms, a child's voice humming from the vents. They said it was just the wind. Still, one of them swore he once found a piece of chalk on the floor, worn down to nothing, and written faintly on the wall above the radiator was a phrase that took him hours to scrub away. She signed it true this time. Some say the photograph still exists, that it reappears when it's needed, when someone forgets who they are or where they came from. They say it doesn't capture faces, it collects them. Each time someone looks too long, the image changes, adding a faint reflection that wasn't there before, the reflection of the one who's watching. Others say it's only a story, a superstition passed from one archivist to another. But somewhere, deep in the restricted vaults of the Chicago Historical Society, there's a record that can't be checked out. The folder is marked St. Mary's Orphan Home, 1902. Inside, an old photograph lies beneath a layer of glass. And if you look closely, just closely enough, you might notice that one of the girls has moved her hand. She's holding the chalk again. Her slate is blank. But when the light changes, and your reflection falls across the glass, the faint outline of a word begins to form beneath her fingers. Your name. Some stories are not about what we see, but about what refuses to disappear. And in every photograph, there's always a name that time forgot to erase. This was Veilside Stories. If you felt this echo, subscribe. There are more memories waiting for you in the shadows of the next frame.